ለመማር ወደ ትምህርት ተቋም መሄድ ግድ አይደለም። ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ
ራሳችሁን ከኮሮና ቫይረስ ወረርሽኝ እየጠበቃችሁ በቤታችሁ ወይም በተመቻችሁ ቦታ በኢንተርኔት አማካኝነት በኦንላይን ትምህርታችሁን መከታተል ትችላላችሁ።
ካናዳ ከሚገኘው ኢንተርናሽናል ኤር ትራንስፖርት አሶሲዬሽን አያታና ከእንግሊዙ ኢንስቲትዩት ኦፍ ኮመርሻል ማኔጅመንት ICM ጋር በመተባበር የሚሰጡ ትምህርቶችን ተከታትላችሁ በ6 ወር ጊዜ በዓለም አቀፍ ደረጃ ተቀባይነት ያለውን የስልጠና ማስረጃ ባለቤት መሆን ይቻላል።
ልምድ ባላቸው መምህራን እየተማራችሁ ጥያቄና መልስ፣ የክፍል ስራዎች፣ ፈተና መፈተን ክፍል ውስጥ እንዳላችሁት አይነት በኦንላይን ባላችሁበት ቦታ ከናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ
የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ
As you remember, we have finished chapter 3. It was about philosophy of language and logic. Under chapter 3, we have seen the definition of philosophy of language, the function of language. We have seen the different techniques of how we can define terms or subjects of an argument. We have seen the different functioning typology of definition. And we have also seen the theories, philosophical theories of meaning. Today we begin a new chapter. That's about critical thinking. Critical logic and critical thinking. This is a newly added chapter in the course Logic and Philosophy. In the curriculum, it was not part of Logic and Logic course. But now, after the Minister of Science and Education has been formally structured, this chapter is a newly added course because critical thinking is very basic and very pivotal for students to learn it. So that this is the mainstream chapter that you need to give attention. So in this chapter, we'll see around 6 lessons. The first lesson is all about the introductory part. In this introductory part, we'll see the conceptualizing of critical thinking. We'll see the definition of critical thinking, its conceptual definition. Definitions forwarded or suggested by scholars, we'll see those related concepts. Under the second lesson, we will see the standards of critical thinking, because we will see critical thinking is a discipline thinking, which means it uses a clear standards. So in the second lesson, we'll see the basic criteria for standards of critical thinking. Then in the third lesson, we will see the traits the traits of the critical thinking. Under this lesson, we'll also look at the traits or the personality characteristics of uncritical thinkers. In the fourth lesson, we will see the barriers. There are barriers in critical thinking. In this lesson, we'll see those barriers or constraints of critical thinking. In the fifth lesson, we will see the benefits or the importance of learning critical thinking. So we will cover this sixth lesson under this chapter. So now let's start in conceptualizing critical thinking. To make it better of the teaching learning process, let me show you the document that. Okay, as you can see from the screen, is basic concept of critical thinking. As an introductory part, let's see some issues. Critical thinking is the power of disciplined thinking, as I have told you at the beginning. So critical thinking is the power of disciplined thinking, which means in critical thinking, we use basic standards. We use basic criteria in studying critical thinking, which means, for example, there are different disciplines. Behavioral discipline, for example, such as psychology. There is discipline also in philosophy. In critical thinking, we use the application of these disciplines at the basic criteria. So that critical thinking is the power of disciplined thinking, which means we use a clear standards of the disciplines such as philosophy, behavioral science such as psychology, and educational disciplines. So critical thinking is the power of disciplined thinking. Again, it's also about learning to think yourself, to think about yourself and being your own person, rather than the propagator of the other sound and the other reflections. Being your own person. You'll not be depend on the thinking, the ideas and the perspectives of the other. So critical thinking can help you to become yourself and be able to speak out your own ideas. So it's about learning thinking for yourself, being your own person. In general, we have two kinds of thinking: the low order thinking and high order thinking. I feel you students in your previous elementary and secondary school, you have experienced a low order thinking because of the curriculum itself and the way you get educated. Because I know that in the teaching learning process, there is only observation of information and repeating back it on the when it's appear on the test. But this is not advisable. As a higher educational student, you need to be develop a high order thinking, which is not, you should not limit it only hearing, listening, and speaking out what other has been told you. You need to internalize ideas. You need to look at in detail. You need to look at interactively. You need to look at ideas in both sides, both its cons and its pros. You should not study, you should not read reading materials only for the sake of observation of that information. You should actively, intelligently evaluate the ideas and the information of the materials that you have looking at. So as a high order thinking student, you must be an active listener. You must be an intelligent evaluation of ideas, which means you should not only listen the idea of your own, you should not only looking at your own perspectives. You should give chance for others to tell you their perspective. And you will then give a kind of fair judgment on the ideas. So that you must evaluate ideas and information intelligently. So this is recommended as a higher student learners for you. You should not advocate low order thinking for higher educational students. Basically, this low order thinking is highly preferable and advocated for low grade students, for example, basically for kids in the teaching learning process of in the kindergarten. You should not be a reflective learners, only yes, that is it, like that. You should be also an impulsive learner. So the course, this critical thinking course, gives you the chance to develop your high order thinking. It helps you because in this chapter, what I'm going to teach you is not what you think, rather how you think, how you evaluate ideas and information. So it is you can develop your critical thinking capacity. Of course, critical thinking can be developed since your childhood. Age does not matter. But as per the available curricula and other relevant instruments, in your previous educational background, you may exposed only for the order thinking, but it should not be limited. So this is very, very, very crucial as a scholar and as a high educational institution student to grasp the critical thinking standards and criteria. So the main goal of this course, this chapter, is therefore to teach you student how you think, the way you think, not the substance or the points that you think. How to become an independent and self-directed thinker or learner. So critical thinking is about personal empowerment. Is about personal empowerment and enrichment. You can develop your personal critical thinking habits and experience through learning. You know that there are 3 learning domains in every education: the affective, the cognitive, and the psychomotor domain. In this course, in this chapter, you will grasp your cognitive skill more of. Your mental skill, not physical skill, not the psychomotor. It is help you to develop your personal way of understanding, looking at, or reflecting different ideas on issues. So, critical thinking is all about personal empowerment, capacitating yourself, and empowering yourself by utilizing your mind at its fullest potential. So this critical thinking demands your high order learning domains such as comprehension, synthesis, evaluation, like that. Those high level cognitive skills. So critical thinking encompasses the components, the skills of analyzing argument, your preliminary notion or understanding of. So critical thinking includes the components of the analyzing arguments. You have an understanding of what argument is and analyzing argument. You know the reasoning process based on the evidences we have, the deduction, the induction, judging and evaluating, making decision or solving problems. So critical thinking teach you, or it includes those lessons of logic, such as evaluation of argument, using of reasoning processes based on the evidences that we have, making decision both in certainty and in uncertainty condition, and solving those problems by looking at those alternatives, by exhaustively looking at by making a kind of internal and external analysis, because critical thinking demands looking at things in both sides. So it encompasses these all skills. So it's very comprehensive. It demands a kind of comprehensive skills. So background knowledge is necessary, but not a sufficient condition for any critical thinking within a given subject, which means having a kind of prior understanding or prior knowledge about a certain issue may be necessary, but only having a background knowledge about an issue is not a sufficient condition, which means only having an accumulation of knowledge even is not a guarantee to let you think critically. Your habit of critical thinking must be improved. So having only a kind of accumulation of knowledge for a specific issue is not a guarantee to think critically. There are many individuals who are rich in their knowledge, who has an accumulation of knowledge about a specific issue, but they cannot look at things beyond their horizon. Looking at things in different dimensions. Internalize those knowledge. They may not have those qualities. So it's not a guarantee to think critical. So critical thinking involves both a kind of cognitive skill and civic dispositions. Those dispositions. We look at those dispositions. Cognitive skill. Mental skill. These dispositions, which can be seen as an attitude or a habit of mind, which includes open-minded, fair-mindedness, inquisitiveness. You see? Inquisitiveness, inquiry mind. Concentration and giving concern. Raising questions in different dimension and in different angle. Not becoming a person who is only looking at one's own view. Being flexible. If there is a situation that demands, you must also change your position as per. So we must be flexible in critical thinking as one disposition. Flexibility is very important. The propensity to seek reason. For everything here, reason matters. The reason matters. We should not rely on hearsay. We should not rely on opinion, belief, and gut feeling. We should appreciate reason. We should accept and respect reason. A desire to be well informed. Some individuals, by their nature, they don't want to look at those issues in advance. There is a selective exposure. They only pick those information only what they deserve and what they want to know. But we should be well informed about a certain issue in all dimensions. If that is not so, we cannot able to think critically because there might be lack of information, necessary and relevant information about that thing. So we need to have an interest, a desire to be well informed and concerned about an issue, and respect for the willingness to entertain a diverse viewpoint. We have said this one. We should develop this mindset out. What do you think? Some individuals do not want to accept the views of others. Okay, you may say very different ideas. For example, some individuals, by their nature, they're stubborn, they're rigid. They don't want to entertain others' view by their nature. Others may do not want to entertain the idea of other because of fear of unknown. There might be fear which is unknown. Sometimes it's a disease which affects our entire way of thinking, becoming skeptical and unreasonably suspicious. There are many reasons. But as a critical disposition, we must develop a mind setup that lets others to entertain their view. We should give equal weight like other viewpoint. Then after we have entertained them, we'll look at all ideas in different directions. And then after we'll decide accordingly. So there are empirical researches, ground researches, suggests that people began developing critical thinking competence at the very young age, of course. We can testify, we can give our witness the inquisitive minds of kids. They have a kind of inquiry mind. Age doesn't matter, but it gives us, age also gives us opportunities and as well challenges. In theory, all people can taught to think critically, in theory. The literatures on critical thinking has rooted into primary academic disciplines. Of course, it's not only limited to this academic discipline of philosophy and behavioralist psychology. There are also other disciplines, such as questional disciplines. But these are the primary academic disciplines which have a lot of say about the critical thinking. They study about critical thinking. These separate academic standards have developed different approaches to define critical thinking, reflect their respective concern. The philosophers, the approach of philosophy has its own respective concern, and also the behavioralists or the psychologists have their respective concern. We'll look at those approaches. Look here. The philosophical approach. Let us look at the ancient philosophers, the writing of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Leibniz, and Richard Paul. Exemplify the philosophical approach of critical thinking. According to this approach, it focuses on hypothetical. Hypothetical is as if ideal. Hypothetical critical thinker. And this philosophical approach tried to list the qualities and the characteristics of this person, these philosophers, the characteristics and the qualities of the Socrates, the Aristotle, and other philosophers. It lists this and the behavior or the action of the critical thinkers can perform, according to these writers. And according to Steinberg in 1986, has noted that this school of thought, the philosophical approach, the critical thinker as an ideal type. It is not actual, it's an ideal, focusing on what people are capable of doing under their best circumstances. So this is an idea, and it lists the characteristics and the qualities of those philosophers. And according to the philosophical approach, it is a skillful, reasonable thinking that facilitates good judgment. According to them, because the reasons that this approach says that a skillful and responsible judgment is that the first is that it relies on criteria. It relies on criteria, its own criteria. Those criteria include the dispositions. The dispositions, such as fair-mindedness, being tolerant, flexible, inquisitiveness, like that. It relies upon criteria. And it's self-correcting. There is the way of checking about the information that we have at hand. the judgment that we made based on the available evidences in itself is self-correcting. If there is fallacy or contradiction among the information that we have in our hands, there is the chance to be corrected by itself because there is controversy and there can be the chance of reconciliation, reconciling the facts and ideas. And it's also sensitive to context, according to this one. But what has been forwarded as a limitation of this approach is that the critical thinking is that does not always correspond to reality. Because we have said this is an idea. It's only listing what Aristotle has, the qualities and those characteristics. That's an idea. The extent to which it applies is not actual. It is a kind of potential and ideal, reality, according to this writer. So by emphasizing the ideal critical thinker and what people have the capacity to do, this approach may have less to contribute to discussions about how people actually think. On the other hand, the cognitive psychological approach of critical thinking contrasts with the philosophical perspectives. There is a difference way of looking at critical thinking, viewing critical thinking how. The first difference that lies between this philosophical approach is that the cognitive, it focuses on how people actually, you see here, actual thinking. It's not ideal, actual thinking versus how they could or should think under ideal conditions, under their best circumstances. What is the capacity of human beings if they are on the normal circumstance? If things are totally fulfilled, under their normal, under their best circumstance. That's an ideal. This is the point where this philosophical approach difference lies. It's actual thinking and the ideal nature of the philosophical approach. The second is that the cognitive psychological approach defines critical thinking by the types of action. It's not by listing the qualities and the characteristics of the philosopher that he identifies. Rather, it is the action and the behavior of critical thinkers. Typically, this approach define critical thinking includes list of skills or procedures performed by critical thinkers. We'll see this psychological or behavioralist approach of critical thinking under the fourth lesson. Seeing both sides of the issue, being open to the new evidence that disconfirm your ideas, reason, dispassionately demanding that claims be backed by evidence, deducing and inferring from available facts, solving the problem, and so forth, according to this guy. Despite the difference between the upper two approach, there is areas of argument about critical thinking, the way they look at the critical thinking. For example, their first area of consensus or their area of common understanding of critical thinking is that the analyzing of arguments. They both advocate there must be analyzing of and evaluation of arguments, claims, and evidence. they support weighting of the argument and the top words that we have. This is what makes common both for the above philosophical approach. The second similarity or area of common understanding between these two philosophical approaches, making inference using inductive or deductive. No matter the types of reasoning process is, they agreed the need for reasoning process. Judging and evaluation, make a decision and solve problems. These are the areas or the point that the above two, the cognitivist, that is the psychologist, and the philosophical approaches of critical thinking had reached in agreement. Okay, now let's run to the other point of discussion, that is the parts of critical thinking. What types of thinking is a critical thinking, and how we can differentiate any thinking from a critical thinking? It's a very tricky question. That comes to humans' mind. But as per the literatures that I have seen and that I have read, in order to say a critical thinking, there must be these three parts of critical thinking. The first one is critical thinking demands asking of questions. It's not only, it's not merely accepting facts. It demands or it involves asking questions. Those questions must be relevant to the issue. Those questions must be issues that need to be asked. There must be relevance to the issue that we want to make a brief. Relevant. That question should not be something that will not give us a kind of essential and relevant information about that. Asking questions that need to be asked. Not any questions, not that one. Asking good question, of course, is good, is very somewhat ambiguous, but it is to mean that those questions that will clarify the fact under we investigate, the fact under which we are investigating. Questions that go to the heart of the matter. Questions that will add something to that issue. That is the first parts of critical thinking. The second part is, after we have raised those relevant and essential or needed questions, after we have asked those questions, we must try to answer those questions by reasoning out them. Answering and reasoning out. The way that we give reaction, the way that we give answer for that question must be based on a rigorous scientific procedure, that is applying correct reasoning process. And the third parts of critical thinking, that accepting or believing whatever the outcome is based on the above two parts. the answer, for example, after we have give answer for those questions, the outcome or the result might be against the position that we have from the very outset. So that if that is so, we must change our position accordingly. We should not determine in advance. It is the process which determines the fact, so that we must accept the result or the outcome, whatever is it. It might be positive, it might be negative, but we must accept and respect the result of this reasoning process. So if there is a cumulative, or if these parts of critical thinking exist analogously, we can say that there is critical thinking. Okay, well, of course, we have seen many concepts of critical thinking, but now let's highlight those ideas, those concepts related with critical thinking. Conceptualizing critical thinking, its meaning, its nature, and its attributes. As we have said earlier, critical thinking involves or exercising of skilled judgment or observation. In critical thinking, observation even must be systematic. If it is rough, it will not give us a kind of fact or information that is adequate. So not only the judgment, even the observation must be systematic. Critical thinking means thinking clearly. Clear. We must make things clear first. Having ambiguity, having lack of clarity, it is impossible to look at the whole sides of an issue. So first, we must be clear about that. We'll see this in the standards of critical thinking. So, but here, thinking clearly and intelligently. However, it does not automatically follow that being intelligent means being able to think critically or reason about information in a useful, effective manner. Here, intelligent refers to this one. But being intelligent alone, it does not mean that a person can think critically. So that being smart, being intelligent is not a sufficient. Of course, it is unnecessary. More precisely, critical thinking is a general term or given to a wide range of cognitive skills and intellectual dispositions need to be effectively identified, analyzed, evaluate arguments, and true claims. So accordingly, these are the most widely cited critical thinking dispositions. This critical thinking disposition must exist in the one who is that we refer as a critical thinker, being open-minded rather than narrow-mindedness, fair-minded fair-mindedness, being equitable and able to look at fairly, fair-minded, at equal weight, 50-50. The propensity to reason, always we have seen this one, relies on reason, propensity to seek reason. We should not accept things without reason, and we should not again reject ideas without reason. Giving and receiving, demand reasoning out, use reason, believe in reason, no matter the fact is, believe in reason. Inquisitiveness, we have seen this one. Inquiry mind, questioning, raising question, than only fasting to make a decision, to solve problems. Because if you have a kind of inquisitive mind set up, we will able to look at different alternatives. We will able to resolve our advanced differences from the very beginning. If we raise questions, things will become clear. The more we raise questions, the more it will become clear. Having a kind of clear idea about issue, it lets you the chance to think critically, having inquisitiveness. The desire to be well informed. I have seen this one. Flexibility, respect for and willingness to entertain others' viewpoint. Individuals may change through time because of education, because of experience, because of other reasons. So don't expect people they will reflect as if they are in prior. They may improve things so that you may get very, very, very important ideas from others. So, in order to utilize those opportunities which belongs on others, first we must permit others to entertain their viewpoints. And we must respect their view. If you reject their idea from the very beginning, how we can reach into agreement? Very tricky, impossible. By the way, what makes human beings in general common is that if you say no from the very outset, they will not reach into agreement. First, accept their idea. Then you will go through and invest accordingly to solve those differences. First, you must respect their idea as a critical thinker. These are the most cited critical thinking dispositions. So critical thinking is thinking clearly, thinking fairly, thinking rationally, and objectively, not subjectively, thinking independently. If you become a critical thinker, you'll not be submissive. You'll not only tell for others the voices and the perspectives of the others. You'll not be submissive. So thinking independently. It's a process that hopefully leads to an impartial investigation of data, not partial, impartial, fair investigation of the data. It may be in contrary with our perspective, and it may not be also. thorough investigation of the data, and facts that remain not swayed by irrelevant emotions. Here, in critical thinking, we should not permit our gut feeling and emotions. If emotions, sometimes they may work. When we lack experience, gut feeling and emotions may work. But in critical thinking, we should not permit irrelevant emotions. Any feeling are not correct by themselves. Well, so we should not permit to prevail our emotions over facts. Therefore, the aim of critical thinking is to arrive at well-reasoned, considered, and justifiable conclusion. So, according to this guy, John Dewey has defined critical thinking as the active, persistent, careful consideration of belief or supposed from the forms of knowledge in light of the ground which supports it and the further conclusion to which it tends. So critical thinking attaches huge importance to the reasoning, to giving reason, evaluation of reason as far as possible, its reputation. And according to Robert, it is defines critical thinking as reasonable, reflective thinking. Thinking, not learning. That is focusing on deciding what to believe or do. And according to Richard Paul, critical thinking is that the mode of thinking about any subject, content, or problem, which the thinker improves the quality of his or her thinking by skillfully taking charge of structures inherent in thinking and imposing intellectual standards upon them. And according to this guy, critical thinking can be defined as skilled and active interpretation. Active and skilled interpretation, evaluation of observation, communication, information, and argumentation. So, Scriven argued that critical thinking is an academic competency akin to the reading, writing, and is of similar fundamental importance. So, critical thinking is the combination of creativity and thinking. That is being critical and being creative. It's a combination of two, which means the first one is critical thinking is something that taught to sound rather than negative, as though one's only interest is adversely criticize other people's arguments and ideas. To be good at evaluating arguments and ideas, one often has to be very imaginative and creative about other possibilities, alternative considers, different opinions, and so on. At the same time, to be a good judge of issues is not enough to see faults, what other people say. It's not a kind of debate, okay? Only looking at faults on others and then investing on that fault. It's not on that, like that one. It's a good judgment of issues. You need to base your judgment on the best argument you can devise in the time available. So time matters. This often requires you to think of relevant considerations. Other than those presented, look at issues from different point of view, imagine alternative scenarios, and perhaps find other relevant informations. These are very simple concepts you can read and understand for better. In short, critical thinking is a kind of evaluative thinking. Evaluation, which involves both criticism and creative thinking, and which particularly concerned with the quality of reason or argument that is presented in support of a belief or a course of action. Okay, that is the conceptualizing of critical thinking. So, as you can understand from the above explanations, it is very, as I have told you, and as it is common for all, possible to say, for most social terminologies, we cannot have one single working definition of critical thinking. But you must don't forget that those parts of critical thinking to understand what critical thinking is. As you see, different scholars define in different wordings, but the substance is not that much different. The wording may differ. So now let us look at the criteria or the standards or the yardsticks of measuring critical thinking. So here we'll look at those criteria that an intellectuals need to refer in critical thinking. You as an intellectual, because we have said from the beginning, critical thinking is a disciplined thinking, which means it is governed by clear intellectual standards. That's why it makes a disciplined thinking. It's governed by clear intellectual standards. And we have seen that all thinking are not critical thinking. So beside the above full-fledged parts of critical thinking, these standards or criteria are the basis or the yardstick to say a thinking is critical. So any critical thinking must fulfill or it must meet these standards. So here, standard of critical thinking refers to, the phrase itself refers to the standards of critical thinking, refers to a condition or a level that critical thinking should meet to be considered as normal and acceptable, as objective criteria, as objective to all. So among others, many. Of course, different literatures provide different standards of critical thinking. Now we'll look the most cited and the most important intellectual standards. So as intellectual, you as an educated person, you must have these qualities and you must fulfill these standards. The first one is clarity. We have seen in the definition of critical thinking, precision, accuracy. We have seen also relevance, consistency, logical correctness, completeness, and fairness. Please, may I give you tea break or shall we drag on? May I give you tea break?
Okay, sir.
Okay. After 10 minutes, please come back.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
በትምህርት ከፍ ብሎ መብረር ይቻላል። ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ከከፍተኛ ትምህርት አግባብነትና ጥራት ኤጀንሲ ሙሉ ዕውቅናን ባገኘንባቸው በማስተርስ ዲግሪ ኤምቢኤ በስትራቴጂክ ማኔጅመንት፣ ኤምቢኤ በባንኪንግ እና ፋይናንስ፣ ኤምቢኤ በቢዝነስ ሊደርሺፕ፣ ኤምቢኤ በሪስክና ኢንሹራንስ፣ ኤምኤስሲ በኢንተርናሽናል ትሬድ እና ኢኮኖሚክስ ዘርፎች በእውቀት ለመቅረጽ የበቁ ፕሮፌሰሮቻችን አረንጓዴ መብራታቸውን አብርተዋል። በነገራችን ላይ በኬንያ ሀገር ከሚገኙ ስመጥር ዩኒቨርሲቲዎች በሚመጡ ፕሮፌሰሮች የትኩረት መስክ ትምህርቶቹ መሰጠታቸው ልዩ ያደርገናል። በምርጥ የትምህርት ስርዓት የተገነባው ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ በመጀመሪያ ዲግሪ በአቪዬሽን ማኔጅመንት፣ በሆቴል ማኔጅመንት፣ በአካውንቲንግ እና ፋይናንስ፣ በማርኬቲንግ ማኔጅመንት አስተማማኝ ትምህርት ይገቢውና ራስዎንና ሀገሮን ይለውጡ። አድራሻ 22 አደባባይ ወደ ሾላ በሚወስደው መንገድ ላይ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ህልሞን እውን ያደርጋል።
Now let's look at these standards of critical thinking in detail. The 8 standards. The first and the most important criteria in critical thinking as an intellectual is clarity. First, we must be clear about an issue. Okay? Is very fundamental. It is a gateway for other standards of critical thinking. Without having a clear understanding of an issue or a fact, we cannot look at other standards. First, we must be clear about a certain fact. So clarity is the most important and the gateway for other standards. It is after we become clear of that we will look other standards. Completeness is fairness, it's consistency. These are secondary questions when we compare clarity with those standards. It's a gateway. First, we must be clear. So clarity here refers to the understanding of the concept. Understanding of the concept and clearly expressing them in a language that is free of security and vagueness. If there is ambiguity and if there is ambiguity, and if an expression is in a very confusing manner, we cannot understand it from the very beginning, from the very outset. So that first we must express in a very brief and clear language, so that will be free of an ambiguity and lack of clarity. So before we effectively evaluate person argument or claim, we need to understand clearly what a person is saying. Before advocating, before supporting, or before rejecting the argument of our counters, first we must we must first understand those arguments. In order to give feedback, in order to argue in contrary with them, to evaluate their argument, first, we must be clear. So something that lacks clarity, if it's not expressed in a clear manner, that might be because of carelessness or laziness, or it might be because of lack of skill, relevant skill to make it brief. And sometimes there are also misguided refers to mislead others. If something like this, because of this reason, we cannot say something about that. So we must first be clear of the argument of others and the language that we use in expressing or in giving our comment. So clarity is a gateway. That is why we use the word here, a gateway for other standards. the remaining standards. Because we must be first leave. According to William Strang, J. and White in their classical, the element of style remark that muddleness is not merely a disturber of prose, is also a destroyer of life. This was only limited for as a disturbance. It also go further, may destroy life, of hope. Death on the highway caused by badly worded road sign. So that we are not clear about that. Heartbreak among lovers by misplaced phrase in well-intentioned letters. So that by paying careful attention to the language that is on the road sign, badly worded road sign. So by giving attention on the badly worded road sign and by giving attention to the misplaced phrases, well-intentioned on the letter, we can make it clear and avoid these negative effects, heartbreak of lovers and causality on the road days. So becoming clear about an issue or a fact is a preliminary requisite. Only by paying, we have said this one, so the first standard of critical thinking as intellectual is becoming clear about. So to achieve our personal goal in our life, in our daily life, throughout in our life, we need a clear conception of our goal and priority. Some individuals know their interests, their aspiration, their well-set goals. All the others are, and there are individuals which do not set plan, which means they don't have a clear conception of their goals. If you ask him, you don't know what his goal is, which means he's not clear about his goal. So if he's not clear about his goal, how can we able to succeed that goal? So first, he must knowingly clear about his goal and those that he gives priority to make it realistic. So clear understanding of the problems and opportunity we face. To solve our problems, to give or to provide alternative solutions. Sorry. Okay, make sure it's not COVID. Clear understanding of the problems and opportunities. So clarity is very, very important standard. The second one is precision. Precision. Precision is all about being exact, accurate, and careful. Is that possible to know about things 100%? Be of sure. Can we know about a certain issue in 100%? Not at all. We cannot be certainly sure about a certain thing because there are things that we do not know. But as one standard of critical thinking, precision means being exact, accurate, and careful. Means understanding all relevant, we'll see relevant itself, detailed factors by exhaustively. Knowing those detailed facts, we can think critically, because we know those things. So most ideas are vague and obscure through, so we think we have precise understanding of. We may say that I know Mr. Kale, I know Miss Kale, or you may say I know definitely or 100% about an issue, but it cannot be. We cannot know one thing in 100% precision. Having this limitation, we can have exact and accurate and careful information about this. So precision refers to get precise understanding. We should pay close attention to detail. So in order to precisely understand an issue, we must give the due emphasis for details. The third one is accuracy. Accuracy here refers to about correct information. Here we must look at the source of the information. There are legitimate sources. There are also illegitimate sources. So the source of the information determines its accuracy. And in order to improve the adequacy of or the correctness of the information, we should look at different sources of the information, so that it will help in scrutinizing the genuine information among the misleading one. So in critical thinking, we should care of a lot about genuinity, about facts, about truth. We should not critically think, as I have told you, by referring hearsay, opinions, beliefs. So, because opinions, beliefs cannot be, in some occasion, cannot be a genuine source of information. If the idea, the thoughts on the process are not real, then one's decision based on wrong and false information will like to result in these distorting realities. If we make decision, if we're trying to solve problems based on those false informations, that the solution will also mislead us. It will not work. It cannot be a solution for our problems, because the fact has been already distorted. The reality has been distorted. So we should give attention for the genuinity of the information, for not to distort the reality on the ground. According to the contemporary philosopher, an American contemporary philosopher, John Rawls, and a book entitled Theory of Justice, he says that truth is the first virtue of system of thought. Truth must be given priority. We should be concerned about truth. So according to this man, truth must be a virtue of the system of any thought. Simply this tells us, in case of accuracy, we should care about truth and genuinity and the accuracy of the source of the information. If this is not the case, as I have told you, the decision also affects accordingly. So accuracy is about having and getting true information. You should select. Because in this contemporary world, there are many pretenders and false sources. There are many wrong authorities who are saying I can take the responsibility, but the fact is not the case. So getting the truth information is very difficult, but we must try to get this true information. So critical thinker, as a critical thinker, do not merely value the truth, that also have a passion for a timely information. As I have told you, what is fact, what is true, what is fact in one time may be deconstructed. So we should not only listen our passion and outdated, which is untimely facts and information. We need to be also updated. We need to have updated information. Because of the dynamic nature of the world, there is no static thing, so that knowledge's facts may be changed. So that we need to have a timely information, timely. The fourth standard is that relevance. Here refers to the question of relevance is the question of connection or relatedness. For example, court. In court, for example, the alleged evidences which are given as a testimony for committing of a crime in a certain culprit or suspect is that bringing a kind of information or evidences, not information, evidences, which will let him, that person, commit the crime. A judge who brings facts which are not related with that crime, that particular crime, that evidence will not be relevant in the eyes of the court. For example, that man may rape a woman in other criminal incident. But if he come to the court for the case of corruption, the information or the evidences that the judge should give as a testimony of committing a crime must be only related with the commission of the corruption, not about other types of his misbehavior and crimes. Commission of other crimes is not relevant to let him he's committed a crime. There must be relevant, related or connected with that issue. So relevance is the most important thing. If we are discussing about, if we are about animals, the information, the evidences that we provide must be related with animal. If we bring about other kingdoms, it's not relevant. It must be connected with that issue. If we discussing about human, it must be related with that. So the question of relevance, adequate and relevance, admissibility of the fact is very important in critical thinking. Critical thinkers do not, because this helps us to avoid even the applying of general rule to the specific rules. Because there are problems which are committed in interpreting such occasions and rules. The general may govern a specific occasion. Critical thinkers do not collect any information. You see, if we wanted to collect, we may have many alternatives, but don't waste your time by collecting all information. Only concentrate on relevant. Okay, if it becomes too much, it will even become very huge task for you for selecting, for analyzing which facts are relevant. So do not waste your time for collecting all information. Only concentrate your efforts on few and relevant areas. Okay? Only for that has logical relation with the idea at hand. Issues raised should have a logical connection with the question at hand. So ideas are relevant when they have logical connection. So a critical thinker should be relevant to his ideas and thoughts. This is the most, important. Now let's look at consistency. Consistency is also very basic. Consistency is about the quality of always behaving in the same way, being predictable. There are individuals who are predictable. We can say something about what can someone do about that issue, because they may have a consistent behavior, consistency, the quality of having or behaving in the same way or having the same opinion or standard. So logic tells us that if a person will inconsistent belief, at least one of those beliefs must be false. If I condemned very prejudiced and uncivilized ideas, I must condemn all acts which are against the nature of humanity. For example, if someone comes from my village or from my ethnicity, and if he do a wrong thing, I must condemn him at the same time when I look at or when I hear of a wrong thing at the same time from someone who comes from other ethnicity or his ethnic background, I must consistently condemn these two individuals in the same way. I should not give my favor for the one who is near to me by geographically or by other ethnical identities. I must become a consistent as intellectual. So inconsistency in logic is not acceptable, totally. It's not acceptable. So there are two unacceptable types of consistencies that we must avoid as an intellectual. The first one is logical inconsistency. This refers to saying or believing inconsistency, which involves saying or believing inconsistent things, contradiction about facts. The things that cannot both or all be true about a particular, logical inconsistency. Facts which are contradictory by them. Where if we accept two, or if we have two contradictory ideas at the same time, I can say both or one of the two are incorrect. That's not logical consistency. Having two ideas which cannot be reconciled is not attribute of the logical person, and this is inconsistency in logic. The other one is practical inconsistency. It is very dangerous, you see, than the first one, which involves saying one thing and doing another thing. You see, this person is a very pretender. He says one thing, but his action is not related to what he says. Saying and doing. There is huge difference in the implementation and the idea. I say something and I act not in line with what I have said. Practical inconsistency. Majority of us failed to become a kind of practically consistent citizens. We must be practically consistent. We must be honest what we have said and what we have do. So critical thinking helps us becoming aware of such unconscious practical inconsistencies, allowing us to deal with them on conscious and rational habits. So critical thinking should be consistent, logical, and practical. The sixth one is logical correctness. To think logically is to reason correctly, very clear. That is to draw well-founded conclusion from the beliefs that we have. Simply, this elaboration can be summarized by saying that the conclusion that we have must be depend on the claim or the samples that we have at hand. Completeness, it's a little bit related with the precision. In most contexts, we prefer deep and complete thinking to shallow and superficial thinking. We should not prefer to think superficial or shallow. You know, ጥራዝ ነጠቅ የሚባለው ላይላዩን ብቻ አውቆ ብዙ የሚያወራልን ሰው አለ። ላይላዩ he gives many testimony, but he knows very, very few, but not good. We prefer a deep and complete thinking. Of course, there are times when it is impossible. We have said that we cannot know all details about the issue being discussed. Of course, however, thinking is better when it is deep rather than shallow. The last one for this discussion is that fairness. Fairness here refers to treating all relevant viewpoints similar without referring to one's own feeling or interest. First, we must be we don't permit our feelings and interest in judging facts or in looking at to choose different relevant viewpoints. Treating all fairly. Correcting demands that our thinking be fair, that is open-minded, impartial, free of distorting biases and preconceptions. But a difficult as it may be, achieve basic fair-minded is an essential attribute of a critical thinkers. Okay, this is all about our today teaching learning process. Thank you very much for your coming. See you in the next teaching learning class. Bye.
Bye.
ልዩነት መፍጠር ዓላማችን ነው። ዓለም አቀፍ ተወዳዳሪ መሆን አለባችሁ። የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ ጥራትና ደረጃውን የጠበቀ ስልጠና በመስጠት ብቁ ዜጋ እያፈራን ነው። በፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን፣ በበረራ መስተንግዶ፣ በቲኬቲንግና ሪዘርቬሽን፣ በሆቴልና ቱሪዝም ሙያዎች አሰልጥነን ተወዳዳሪ እናደርጎታለን። ኮሌጃችን ካናዳ ከሚገኘው ኢንተርናሽናል ኤር ትራንስፖርት አሶሲዬሽን አያታና ከእንግሊዙ ICM ጋር በመተባበር ዓለም አቀፍ ዕውቅና ያለው ስልጠና እየሰጠ ይገኛል። በፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን፣ በበረራ መስተንግዶ የምንሰጣቸው ስልጠና ከኢትዮጵያ ሲቪል አቪዬሽን ባለስልጣን ሙሉ ዕውቅና አለው። አድራሻ ከጎላጉል ታወር 22 አደባባይ ወደ ሾላ በሚወስደው መንገድ ላይ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ ህልሞን እውን ያደርጋል።